Hello! In my previous video I talked about buying a village house in Ukraine. With buying residential apartments or houses in Ukraine, everything is simple. You pay only 1% tax to a pension fund and you can buy hundreds and thousands of houses in 1 year. And in such case you pay only 1% tax to a pension fund for each property. That's it. But with selling property, everything is not as simple, and let's talk about it in this video. But before we begin, please like this video and check if you are subscribed to my channel. If not, please subscribe. Taxes for selling residential property in Ukraine as of January 2024. Actually, these taxes didn't change for maybe 15 or more years, but maybe they will be changed in the future. There is a 1% of valuated price of property to the pension fund. So when you buy property in Ukraine, you pay 1% to the pension fund, and seller also pays 1% of valuated price of the property to the pension fund. Second, if you own house for more than 3 years, that is for more than 1095 days, then you don't pay any additional tax. But if you own property for less than 3 years, you pay 17% of tax to the tax office. But there is one trick when you buy a house or an apartment. For example, you can buy a house and a garage, and then you have 2 pieces of property. Or you can buy an apartment and a parking space, and that's also you have 2 pieces of property. With selling second piece of property, you pay additional 5% of tax. It is payable to a local tax office. And also you must own this property for more than 3 years, for more than 1095 days. And tax for selling third piece of property in that calendar year, and it doesn't matter if you own it for more than 3 years or for less than 3 years, it will be 17% tax plus 1% to the pension fund, and 1.5% it will be a war tax. So rule of thumb here is if you want to buy property, it is better not to plan to sell it in the next 3 years. So if you need to sell urgently your house, your apartment or any other residential property, you will have to pay a 19.5% tax. Well, it will be a 17% tax to the tax office, 1% tax to a pension fund, and 1.5% of a war tax. But everything is not as scary as it may seem, and we have a lot of tax optimization schemes, and let's look at some of them. Suppose you buy 3 houses or 3 pieces of property, like apartment and let's say 2 village houses. Let's assume you bought an apartment in November 2023. Then in November 2023 you bought the first village house, and in December 2023 you bought a second village house. Now let's suppose in 2026 you are fed up with Ukrainian girls and decide to move to Philippines and try luck there with some Filipino girls. You have to sell all your property in Ukraine. Suppose you bought your first property, which is apartment, on 1st of November 2023. And that means that on 2nd of November 2026, you can sign papers with a notary and sell your apartment paying only 1% tax. Then in November 2026 or in December 2026, you should sell your second house. And it is better to sell the cheaper one that you own for 3+ years. And thus you pay only 1% to the pension fund and 5% to the tax office. Well, it will be also 1.5% of war tax. Then your last third house you sell in the beginning of January 2027. And since it is a new calendar year and you own that house for more than 3 years, you will have to pay only 1% tax to the pension fund. That's it. Better that your third house is more expensive than your second house, because on your second house you will have to pay 7.5% of tax, and on your third house, because you sell it in a new calendar year, you will have to pay only 1% to the pension fund, and that's it. So I hope this is understood. If you have like two houses or a house and an apartment, everything is simple. First, you sell after owning for 3 years an apartment or a more expensive house first, and then you either wait for the next calendar year and sell your second property and pay only 1%, or you sell just a cheaper property second. And thus you pay 7.5% tax for the second property and 1% tax for the first property. Or if you can wait for the next calendar year, you pay 1% tax for the first property and 1% tax for the second property, assuming that you own it for more than 3 years, first and second piece of property. And to make this video the most complete guide to selling property in Ukraine, let's see a more complicated example. Suppose in August 2024 you buy a village house in Ukraine, and in November 2024 you buy an apartment and a parking place, and in December 2024 you buy a village house. So after 3 years, in for example August 2027, you will sell your first house. In December 2027 you will sell a second house, which will be cheaper than the first one. And in January 2028, you sell an apartment first, and then you sell a parking place on the next day. And in such case, you pay 1% to the pension fund for the first piece of property in one calendar year, 7.5% in all taxes for the second property in that same calendar year, and in the next calendar year you sell your apartment and you pay only 1% tax for the apartment, and parking place you sell on the next day and you pay 7.5% for the parking place. I hope this is understood. If taxes for selling property for residents and non-residents in Ukraine are absolutely the same, you would ask, what about inheritance? Here situation is absolutely different. If you're a non-resident and your house or apartment will be inherited either by your wife, your children, or anyone else, the person who inherits your property will pay 19.5% no matter what. Same with so-called gift agreements. If you want to present your apartment or your house to absolutely anyone, to a resident or non-resident, person to whom you present this property will have to pay 19.5% tax. With residents it is different, but with non-residents it is always 19.5% tax, no matter what. I hope you found this video useful. If you want me to talk about renting property and where to find tenants for your houses or apartments that you may buy, there is also a possibility to buy, for example, a $5,000 or euros house and rent it to a family, and so they make some renovation in it. So if you're interested about renting a village house in Ukraine that you would want to buy, please write in comments and I will record a video about that. But please ask specific questions about it, because it's quite a big subject and I want to answer questions that you are most interested in. If any of you need my personal assistance, help or advice, please feel free to email me at my email address, and I always glad to help those people who really need help. Please feel free to ask any questions in comments to this video, and I will be glad to answer them briefly. In the meantime, I wish you all good luck, success, happiness, joy, tranquility, and of course, stay healthy and wealthy.